we've had the call on Activision last week after the deal was announced, but we didn't get a sort of Q&A session. So it'd be really interesting to hear sort of what the investor community has to ask the management team about this deal, sort of in particular how they intend to sort of navigate the regulatory hurdles to the deal going through, and crucially, I think how they sort of are going to handle content on their platform, but on adjacent platforms, so Xbox versus PlayStation, for example, and whether they're going to push for exclusivity or otherwise of Activision content.
Now, while gaming has got all of our attention, of course, Microsoft's core business is going to be in focus here. What about what you're expecting to hear regards cloud computing with Azure, but also Office 365?
Yeah, so the Azure number's massively important. It's sort of a fairly big revenue line for Microsoft today and gets a lot of investor scrutiny. And sort of misses or beats versus consensus do have a big impact on sentiment. So that number's going to be hugely important. But I think it's also really important to think that, like, on a multi-year view, the Azure business has a huge quantum of growth ahead of it. It's a very underpenetrated market. Azure has a great potential position within it, given their ability to sort of cater to hybrid cloud infrastructure needs. So that's going to be a hugely important number to monitor. I think the other areas of interest really are going to be their sort of on-premise server tools business, which in the last couple of quarters has experienced some pretty good growth, and that's pretty high in the context of the wider transition to the cloud. So it'll be interesting to see how that number shakes out. And then finally, we have things like Office 365, which have been important growth engines over the last few years and continue to print very strong numbers. We are yet to see the impact of recently announced price increases to come through, but there's still a very strong dynamic of sort of seat growth and upsell coming through in that business.
Paddy, good morning. It's Juliana. Looking back at the last couple of weeks, Netflix really stands out as a company that took the market by storm and really rattled investors. I mean, extraordinary 20% drop after they disappointed versus expectation. When it comes to Microsoft, is there any scope that we could see a substantial sell-off if the company does disappoint later today?
So I think when we look at Microsoft in the context of wider tech, it's definitely not immune from sort of all the stuff that's going on at the moment in terms of sort of rate cycles, etc. But what we have with Microsoft is a fairly mature business, but one in which has still got a very strong trajectory of growth ahead of it, delivers incredible sort of operating margins and cash flow generation, and is still, I would deem, to be relatively reasonably valued in both a relative sector context and an absolute market context too. So I say the risk of such a severe sell-off is far lower in a business that sort of exhibits those qualities.